Elder Craig here today. I am just coming in at you with my third teaching video for Holy Week. We're taking a look at the 7 statements of Christ from the cross, and today we're looking at the third statement. I want to thank all of you who've been joining me regularly for those. Also, a particular shout out to Pastor Kevin. He has helped me immensely in making sure that these have gotten up onto the website and onto Facebook. Been a real help to me. Also, an apology to Pastor Kevin, because I think in Monday's video, I introduced myself as Pastor Craig. Well, obviously, I'm not Pastor Craig. I'm Elder Craig. And I just want to make sure we clear that up. There hasn't been a coup in the church. Pastor Kevin is doing marvelous work. He is guiding us through all of the struggles we have with the coronavirus. I appreciate his strength, his efforts, and his energy. Appreciate all the help that he gives to me as an elder and as the church leader. And that being said, why don't we dive right into today's lesson? The last two, we were in the book of Luke. We had the first 2 statements from the cross that are recorded by Luke, the historian. Today, we're changing books. We're going to be coming out of the Gospel of John for the third statement. And so let me read the passage to you. It comes from John chapter 19 and verses 23 to 27. It goes like this. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and divided them into 4 parts, 1 part for each soldier, and also his tunic. But the tunic was seamless, woven in one piece from top to bottom. So they said to one another, "Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it to see whose it shall be." This was said to fulfill the scripture which says, "They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots." So the soldiers did these things. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And then he said to the disciple, "Woman, behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. And as we think about this one, I want to give us a little bit of background before we get too far into it. The first thing that we kind of need to notice is, as I said, this is the third statement from the cross. And all 3 statements that we have seen so far have been directed at others. They have been, if you will, outside of Jesus and not concerning his needs, but the needs of others. The first statement we read, "Father, forgive them, they know not what they do," was directed particularly to the soldiers at the cross who had just crucified him, but quite literally to all of us they were directed. And then yesterday we looked at the other comment that he made, and that was to the thief on the cross beside him. He specifically spoke to him when he said, "This day thou shalt be with me in paradise." Today, as we look at the third statement, we are looking at another statement that is directed to someone. In fact, 2 people this time. It is directed at his mother, Mary, but also at his disciple, in this case, John. And as you think about it, I want you to know that these first statements from the cross come very early on in the crucifixion, probably more than likely within the first hour or so, if that, after he had been crucified. And each of them, as I said, marks a concern of Jesus for others. He interceded with the Father for forgiveness in his first statement. He accepted a plea for mercy and grace in his second statement. And today, he takes the initiative to care for his mother in his third statement. He's fulfilling Old Testament law in this case. The book of Exodus, indeed, the 10 Commandments tell us particularly to honor your father and mother. And in this case, that's what he's doing. He's honoring his father and his mother. But even more than that, Jesus is fulfilling part of his mission on earth. One of the things he came to do was to keep the law and to keep it perfectly. And even here, even on the cross, we see him not neglecting to take care to make sure that he fulfills his command, that he fulfills his duty to keep the law perfectly. In this case, by honoring his mother, by making sure she would be cared for after his death. So you see a lot of things going on here. And I'm going to tell you something else too. These first 3 statements, as I said, come fairly early in the crucifixion. We note that in Luke it tells us after one of the statements that it was the third hour, which means that it would have been noon, because Jesus was crucified at 9 o'clock in the morning. The third hour would have made it noon, and that was when darkness fell. And so between this last statement that he makes to his mother and the end of the crucifixion, there's going to be a silence and darkness come over the earth. And indeed, it is a darkness placed there by God so that Jesus might not have his sufferings made public and reviled like he's had so far. So, having said that, the next time we get together, we will be looking at his fourth statement, and we're going to see a shift there too, because Jesus is going to shift from praying for others to praying for himself. His focus will go off the people around him and go directly on to the Father. But let's take a look at this statement that we have seen today. It's a very simple one, not a lot that goes on here, but it's still worthy of being aware of, because as Christ says, woman, behold your son, because he is fulfilling the commandment to honor your father and mother. And I would suggest that as you contemplate this, that you look at that statement, behold your son, in two ways. Mary was there at the cross, and when he says, behold your son, he's talking about himself. He is saying, behold me on the cross. He knows that she sees him there. He knows, too, that the people around him are mocking him even now. The thief, the rulers, the people that were there, all of them are mocking him. And he wants her to focus on him just for the moment. He wants her to know that he is dying. She's aware of that, I'm sure, but that provides for him the introduction to what he's going to say to her next. Because when he dies, he's going to be passing off his care for her to someone else. And I want you to think back with me a little bit. Remember that Joseph probably died fairly early in Jesus' life. Jesus was probably no older than 20, 21, 22 when Joseph passed away. And he took over not just the running of the carpenter shop, but also caring for his mother, Mary, but also for his brothers and sisters. He took on the full responsibilities of a family. And he had that responsibility right up to the time that he turned 30 years old and began his ministry and left to go to preach and to fulfill the work that he had come for. So he's been the breadwinner. This is not just Mary watching a child pass away, which it is important. I don't want to underemphasize that. But she's also looking much like seeing the main breadwinner pass away. And it would have to be crossing her mind, who will take care of me? Who's going to watch over me? And Jesus, as the eldest son, has the duty to make sure that she's taken care of. So he says, behold your son. He says, look at me. See what's going on. This is why I am doing what I'm going to do next. I want you to be aware of that. And so she looks at him, and as she's looking at him, he says to her, behold your son. And he's looking at John, because John is the one who will step into Jesus' shoes. John, who's walked with him for 3 years, who has heard him preach, who has been at his side, who has been his closest companion of all of the 12 during the time that he was preaching and teaching. It is John to whom he is going to leave the care of his mother. And it's kind of interesting, by the way. We read the passage of all those that were with Mary at the cross. Very likely, one of them was John's mother. And she would have heard Jesus' words to Mary while he's pointing to her son, or while he's looking at her son. She would have known what he was doing. And John, too, would have been aware of that. So he hears those words when he's talking to Mary, behold your son, and is looking at him. And it might raise a question in your mind. Why John? Doesn't Jesus have brothers and sisters? And the answer is yes. Scripture tells us very clearly that he has brothers and sisters. But Mark chapter 3 and verse 21 also makes it very clear that they were unbelievers, at least at this time. We know that James himself, his brother, will become a believer and the leader in the church of Jerusalem, but at this time, he's not there yet. And Jesus is not content to leave his mother into the hands of unbelievers. So he is leaving her to John precisely because his brothers and sisters do not believe. And by the way, one of the other things that you need to be aware of is Jesus himself has said when Mary and his brothers and sisters were outside of his teaching one time, and he was told that, and he said, "Who are my brothers and sisters? It is all those who believe." John was a believer. So John was functioning as a brother to Jesus. He was perfectly appropriate for Jesus to give his mother over to care for. He was a close friend. He was a believer. He was someone who would watch over Mary. And Jesus could be sure of that. So that's what's going on. That's why I said, when Jesus says, "Behold your son," he's thinking of himself, but he's also thinking of John. And I see that we've been joined, by the way, by my favorite pet, Reese, who's visiting for the day. He's making himself comfortable back there on the bed. One last thing to think about, too, is having said, "Woman, behold your son," we also have him saying the word son, "Behold your mother." And obviously, he is, as I said, in this case, speaking to John and putting Mary into his care, knowing that as a relative, as a friend, as a Christian brother, that he'll take care of her. So what does this mean for you and I today? And I think looking over those first three statements, it's very clear that one of the encouragements that you and I can take away from this is pretty simple. It's Christ is concerned for our well-being and for the well-being of others. His focus is not on himself. Even as he's being crucified, his focus is on those who are doing the crucifixion and don't even know what they're doing. His focus is on the one beside him who also in pain, in suffering, and asks for grace, is in need. And he cares for him. And his focus is on his mother and on his disciple, on John. If Jesus, in the midst of the pain that he would have been in on the cross, can still maintain his focus on others and interceding for them, granting them mercy, making sure they're cared for, how much more, now that he sits at the right hand of the Father in the throne of grace, does he care for us? How much more able is he to see our needs, and not just see them, but to meet them and to take care of them? He has such great concern for us. And it also is a good reminder, too, as I said, it's a small thing, but Jesus is concerned for fulfilling the mission of his Father, his mission to pay the price for sin and to perfectly uphold the law, never leaves him, even in the midst of the pain of the crucifixion. Christ covers every detail. He's aware of every need. He meets every need. So we want to hold on to that thought. We want to recognize that in the midst of our greatest pain, just like the thief on the cross, Christ is there. He's right beside us. In the midst of our greatest need, like Mary's, he's there to meet the need and care for it. And in the midst of our deepest darkness, he's there to forgive, just as he said to the soldiers. So take those into account as you contemplate the cross for today, as we look at the 7 statements. Tomorrow, we're going to shift gears away from others, and we're going to start looking at Christ's thoughts for himself and his work. So thanks for joining me today. I appreciate having you along. Appreciate having Reese back there enjoying this too. And I just trust that these little videos are kind of seeing you through and making your heart ready for the celebration of Easter. We'll see you tomorrow.